Hey, Candy here. Want to talk a little bit about where and how trust breaks down, especially in organizations and cultures. And what I want you to understand is very often when trust fractures, it's not coming from those big overarching kind of drama filled scenarios. There are examples of that where it's very blatant and something really goes awry, and there's a leadership miss or a deliberate or intentional way that someone is sabotaging the culture or the environment. But what I want to talk about more is those micro fractures. And so I want to give you a real lived experience that I had when I was back in my corporate career. So this was, 20 some years ago at this point. And so what happened was I was really responsible for building out these ROI models to highlight and illuminate new initiatives and new ways that we were going to go to market in our sales force. And I was working on a particular project where it was really new, it was really innovative, and we were trying to show through data that this was viable and that this was something we really wanted to invest in because it could change the nature of the business and the way that we work with our clients entirely. And so at the time, I was reporting to an executive VP who was like, I want you to build this model. I want you to be able to show where there's the leverage points and where we're actually getting a return on investment, hence the ROI model. So I had reached out to one of my people on my team who was the person that curated and mined our data. And I was like, I need this raw data so that I can plug it into the analysis that I'm doing and I can plug it into this model. And I remember she sent me this data and lots of information in there, right? And as I'm distilling down the actual data itself, there were a couple outliers that were really interesting. And so mapping this out visually and then plugging it into the model that I created, these outliers actually were rather significant. So I sent this as it was analyzed and as I had done the work to really like make sense of the raw data that she had sent me. I sent it to my executive VP. He responds and said, that's great. I'm going to take off those two outliers though, because I really don't like what they look like. And I kind of sat a little bit shocked for a moment and I'm like, excuse me, what? I'm like, you're going to do what? And I responded back, I'm like, you do understand this is the actual data. Like, you can't manipulate the data. It's literally part of the conversation. And he's like, yeah, but I don't like those outliers. They're completely skewing the story I want to tell. And I say this because, first of all, I see this showing up a tremendous amount, especially in the corporate space. But I see this a lot for businesses who really want to create a certain story and yet the data doesn't support it. Or the data says something different that says we need to refine the story and tell the story as it is. And so I have struggled as long as I've been in my master's programs. I mean, I've done master level statistics. I'm a certified Six Sigma black belt. And it has always astonished me how people are like, statistics say, I'm like, statistics are only as good as the context you are putting them in. Because I would offer many times the statistics that we are looking at are an example right there of a microfracture. Because here's what happens. People don't like the data. People don't like what the data is actually trying to tell them. And so they finesse and they get creative and they remove outliers that often tell a very different story. And so this executive VP was very adamant. He was like, Candy, I want you to remove these outliers. And I'm like, I don't think you understand. This changes the entire conversation. And as the executive VP, he has the final say. And I remember I pulled those outliers knowing damn well this was not the right approach. And my data person, as soon as she saw the communications around how I analyzed the data, sent me an immediate message. She's like, Candy, that is not what I sent you. And I said, I know. And here's the response from our executive VP. because I actually had my hands tied in that moment. I mean, it's one of the many reasons why I left corporate at some point, because these are the micro fractures that break down trust in an organization. When you have someone who is holding on to a narrative or holding on to an agenda that says, I'm going to position this, this is my flagship thing I'm going to be known for, that no matter what, come hell or high water, this is what I want to communicate. And what I want you to understand is this is happening all the time. This is the biggest reason why top talent walks out the door. This is the biggest reason why people quietly quit. This is the biggest reason why you have people that could be phenomenal high performers in your organization and people that are deeply invested in the mission and the purpose and what you're trying to move forward, why they put their head down, why they don't say anything, why they don't push back, and why you don't have a culture where people feel like they are safe to speak up, be seen, be heard, and actually contribute in a way that's meaningful. And so, what I want you to realize is this right here is part of the root issue that needs to be resolved. What often happens is when and if, I'm going to put the caveat of if out there, if it's actually acknowledged that trust has been fractured and that there is erosion, deep erosion that is existing within the culture, which absolutely 1000% starts top down. I'll give you another example in just a moment of where this conversation really got me fired up. I want you to understand that trust erosion happens in these micro cracks. So, for example, when I first left corporate, so after, these kind of scenarios and finally was like, I've had enough and this is not real leadership. This is not us building conscious cultures. And I'm very adamant around the intentionality around creating conscious cultures and what's required to really be activated in that space and how we create psychological safety for people to actually be able to push back against top-down leadership, which is oftentimes driving a very arbitrary and ridiculous agenda that is not actually aligned with the overall goals, culture, and core values of that organization. It is a personal feather that they are waving that they want to put in their cap, right? And so when I left corporate, I had the opportunity very early on. I went and did a training or a speaking engagement for a group of transitioning C-suite executives. And so these were former CEOs, former COOs, former CFOs. They had either been pushed out due to retirement or they had been replaced by somebody else in terms of a different vision. For whatever reason, they were transitioning from that C-level executive position, and now they were in this kind of squishy and very vulnerable transition space. And I will tell you, one of the things that I've also learned is the higher the rank, the more personally connected people feel to the identity of the title they carry. Meaning, when you have a C something in front of your title, holy cow, do you hold on to an identity around that and have a very hard time discerning who you actually are as a leader without said title. So as I go around the room, there's like 50 people in this room. And I go around and I'm like, tell me who you are. And everyone's like, I'm the former CEO, I'm the former COO. And every single person gave me a identity that was associated with that title. And so interesting. And when we got all done with the introductions, I was like, wow, interesting how I heard 50 people speak and not one of you told me who you really are. So I kind of already planted the seed that said, we're going to activate something in this space. And as I was going on, because we were having a conversation around leadership being a choice, one of the fundamental pillars that I have built my business on is leadership as a choice. It's a function of how you choose to show up, a function of how you choose to serve others, and it's a function of how you choose to take personal responsibility inside those two spaces. So as we're getting into this leadership workshop, which was, my normal style, which is very catalyzing, activating, and I'm going to call the BS out and put literally name the elephants that sit in every room. one of the men in the room quit, kind of like jumped up, and he's like, "Oh, Candy, I'm with you. I hear you. My culture at the last organization I was at was just crap." And he goes on and he just keeps spewing. He's like, "It was for shit. It was crap. It was these things." And I let him ramble. And when he was done, I let the space just sit. And then I looked at him directly and I said, "Shame on you." And again, I let it sit. And he said, "Excuse me, what?" And I said, "Shame on you. Because if your culture was that shitty and your culture was that bad, did you not just say you were the former chief operating officer of said organization? Shame on you. Culture starts with you." I'm guessing that this transition space you have right now is an opportunity for you to reevaluate and reassess how you're choosing to show up as a leader for the next organization you take on a C-level position. And the room just went quiet because obviously this is not a conversation that often happens. People do not push back on the C suite ever. Again, micro trust breakdowns. This is where trust erodes. If you do not have a leadership team or your direct reports that have an ability to push back when you are spewing bullshit, you do not have a leadership team. You do not have trust. You have fractures in your relationships. You have trust erosion, and you have a culture that is more concerned about CYA, AKA cover your ass, than it is about a conscious way of showing up in a leadership role. And so it just like the air went out of the room. And he comes up to me afterwards, as I've seen many executives do, and comes up huffing and puffing. And he's like puffed up. And he's like, "Candy," as I've got a line of people that want to talk to me, he interrupts. Of course, he interrupts. And he's like, "Candy, I just need you to know, no one has ever." And I decided to offer the return the favor and interrupt him. And I said, "I know." And I got very condescending and patronizing because it was required in this moment. I looked at him and I said, "I know. No one has ever talked to you that way. And that's the problem." And he just like didn't know what to do. He just kind of faltered and he's like, "Well, maybe I need to like think about a few things," and like, and he just stormed off. And I literally took on 5 clients as a result of that because the people that got what just happened in that room were like, "Oh my God, I need to hire you because this is what's getting in my way." We have been taught, and I know I came up in the leadership training schools and I was an up and coming leader that was fast tracked my entire career, 20 years in corporate. And there was a constant reiteration and a constant message around leadership is about taking charge. Leadership is power over. Leadership is you are driving the train and you better know where you're driving it. And I'm going to tell you that that's part of the bullshit that's getting in the way, that's eroding trust in organizations and in your culture. Because when you think it is a power game of any sort, that already is mistake number one. Number two is when you are carrying an agenda that is yours alone and you are not allowing others to call your bullshit when you are talking out of both sides of your ass. Number three is the fact that you are taking valuable information that is real data that has been mined within your organization, whether with your clients or due to products and services that you offer, and you are purposely taking off the things you don't like because it doesn't align with that agenda that you are moving forward. And so back to that previous story with the executive VP, we ended up hanging our hat literally on this initiative and it became the thing that we drove forward. A lot of bumps, a lot of things. And both with the sales force and our internal team, it became a source of high distrust because the data said one thing, yet the story that was created around it said something different. And I will tell you, when those micro cracks occur and when that trust begins to erode on that level, there is oftentimes not a repair to come back. And so for me, it was the start of the demise of it's time for me to leave this environment if this is the way the game is played. I can remember having a review with one of my direct leaders, my direct supervisor, that was my buffer between me and my executive VP. And it came to my performance review, which I always, very, almost every single year, 20 years, I got an E rating. I was a high performer. I knew how to play the game. But she put on my development plan, the one area you need to improve is you need to learn to play the politics. And at this point, I had built a high trust with my direct supervisor at that time. And I wrote back and I said, let me be really clear. You either want me to lead or you want me to kiss ass, but those two things do not happen in the same space. And I am very clear what the politics are in this organization. And I am making a conscientious and intentional decision not to play them so that I can actually lead my teams, which, by the way, are outperforming everyone else in our function and area 5 times over. So you either get me in a leadership position where I'm going to push back and call foul on the BS that's being spewed, or you can tell me that I need to play the politics and then I'm going to hand you my resignation because this is a non-negotiable for me. And I remember her response was, "We're going to create two different plans." One, I said, "You create whatever you want to the powers to be, but this is not an option for me. I am at a point in my career. At this point, I'd been in my career about 18 years in corporate, and I'm like, I am not willing to sacrifice how I show up and lead from a place of intentionality and a deliberate space of taking personal responsibility and accountability for how I'm showing up and how I serve, to play a game that is because a bunch of leaders in the C-suite can't get out of their own way and have an insecurity that says they always need to be right. And so the reason that I'm saying this is happening time and time and time and time again. And right now, especially with everything that's going on in the world, I want you to recognize there are these micro leaks and micro cracks that then become this compounded erosion of trust over time. That again has your high performers quitting. It has people leaving your organization or shutting down. And it has people in positions where they think power over is the equation. Anytime you have a culture, an organization, or a community where there is a energy of power over, you do not have trust established in that said environment. Not possible. You cannot have real trust and have power over, because power over comes from a very insecure, very personal agenda, and it comes from a place of not owning and taking responsibility and accountability for the way that you're showing up and serving. And so I really want you to think about where, and I guarantee where is the question. Where are there trust leaks in your organization and culture? If you want to have a conversation about that, one of the things that's different, this isn't about coming in with more leadership training, and this isn't about rallying the troops and having a 3-day workshop and getting everybody to be like, rah, 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 yeah. And then it's back to the same old shit as always on Monday. This is about excavating the root issues, the underlying places where energy and trust is leaking in your organization. It is the understanding and assessing where relationships have broken down and where there are underlying unconscious and unnamed energetic and mechanical things that are putting unnecessary tension on those relationships and breaking down agreements, which is also another trust crack and another way that trust erodes in that culture. If you are really wanting to get into where that is starting from and the root and excavate that out so that you can rebuild a conscious culture, then let's have a conversation. In the meantime, I would offer you this. It's high time you get really honest about where you are carrying a personal agenda, where you insist on knowing or being right all the time, and where you are oftentimes inadvertently, maybe unconsciously, maybe deliberately, creating those trust cracks in your own organization and culture. With that, this is Candy, and I'm going to leave you with that.